Activists and various progressive groups are pushing California Governor Gavin Newsom to appoint a person of color or a member of the LGBTQ community to fill Kamala Harris's Senate seat in the state come January. And journalist Zaid Jilani is here to discuss. Zed, I mean, this is an astonishing thing. You put it that way, it sounds innocuous. But whenever you look at the criterion that people are using, we're talking about a literal quota system whenever it comes to appointing us. Can you just break down exactly what's going on here?
Yeah, so Daniel Mehrens at the HuffPost had a really good article about this because he laid out basically the different factions that are pushing different candidates to replace Kamala Harris in the Senate. And they're broken down into three camps. There's a faction pushing for some type of Latino appointment, a faction pushing for an African-American appointment, and a faction pushing for maybe an LGBTQ appointment. What's interesting about this is I think that every faction kind of has specific people in mind. Right, they're not just trying to pull someone at random from those populations and put them into the Senate, which honestly might be more interesting than the people they have in mind, because the people they have in mind are largely well-connected political insiders. For instance, Alex Padilla, who's being promoted as the Latino candidate, is the current Secretary of State, sort of an ally and friend of Gavin Newsom's. I believe someone in Daniel's article actually says that he's like a friend of Newsom's, and that's a big part of the push for him. But the way they're making this pitch in the public is that, it would be great to have someone from X, Y, or Z groups. What's really interesting about this is, in general, voters do not care about that, right? Like, voters are not looking to think, well, if someone with a specific melanin content or cultural background is in that office, I will be pleased. I will feel like I'll be well represented. They'll vote the way I want. They'll introduce legislation I want, be responsive. But it's increasingly a feature of kind of liberal politics to organize yourself around these things, because it sort of subsumes any ideological debate, right? It subsumes the debate about record, about personality, about how they administer government, so on and so forth, to just speak to these things. I think the same thing is happening with the Biden administration. They are bragging, for instance, about having an all-female communications team.
Yes.
I'm familiar with some of the people on board here. I'm sure they do their jobs competently, but the fact that this became a press release, I mean, the Trump administration also had women running comms for the most part, if I remember correctly. It's not, it's just sort of pointing to something that's not super relevant, but using it as a sort of political marker or milestone, which to me distracts from the substance of the matter, right? I don't think anybody is just a woman, just a Latino, just an African American, right? Like, those are just broad social categories the way we categorize people. It doesn't speak anything to the person themselves and to what their qualities are and to whether they be a good public servant. And I think often when we fixate on these categories, it does lead us down a path where we're forgetting who the person is and having that more kind of nuanced and I think textured conversation about what that person could bring to government.
That's exactly right. I mean, look, this is California. This is what is it, like the 7th largest economy in the world? I mean, they probably deserve somebody with tens of millions of Americans who live there. Literally, I think our most populous state in the country. And yet, they are not there. The discussion around this is around quotas. None of it is around policy. I read the same piece. I didn't see one iota of any sort of, this person, it pushes this policy, believes that they would change this, or this person would adhere very strongly to Kamala Harris. But then, again, this is the problem with Harris herself. She never really stuck by any sort of ideological prism. She was rated like the most liberal senator in the Senate, which, a lot of the liberals who watch this show are like, huh? Like, what are you talking about? It just goes to show that just in a way, the way that they talk about these issues just boils down to something so completely vacuous and empty that when it comes down to filling the successor, they're literally using a quota system. I just think it's crazy.
Well, it's fascinating because California actually does have a lot of really interesting politicians. So, for instance, like Gail McLaughlin, who was the mayor of Richmond, California, she's someone who organized her city council to stand up to local corporations and fossil fuel interests. She did a lot of police reform that actually brought down both crime and police abuse. But she's a white woman. Does that disqualify her because of her gender and her race? I think, it's interesting how many people in California are actually wiped off the slate altogether if you're simply looking at these skin level, superficial characteristics, right? When we are talking about being represented in government, we are not a factional or a sectarian system, right? Like Lebanon. Lebanon actually has laws in place saying that only someone from certain sects can be in a certain position in government. And actually, young people in Lebanon are trying to get rid of that system. They're saying that made sectarianism worse. It made Sunni and Shia and Christians all fight each other and argue for the same posts and that sort of thing. The young people are trying to get rid of that system while people in America are arguing, kind of de facto arguing for it. And I do think that if you're going to look for something so superficial, you're going to avoid a lot of the ideological and substantive debates. And also, I think you lose a lot of talent. I mean, people like Gail, white woman or not, I think we're very interesting politicians at the local level. We're very responsive to public opinion, very strong on corporate accountability. But, if you're picking by demographic or ancestry or something like that, you wouldn't get that. And again, I don't think that the activists are actually doing that. I think they're just framing it that way, right? Like the people behind Alex Padilla, his kind of stealth candidacy, they're just political insiders who like him, who have access to him, and he's a friend of Gavin Newsom's. But they make the argument that he's Latino, so this is why he needs to have the spot, as if every Latino is interchangeable with another one, right? So
yeah. And, Zaid, while I have you here, I would be remiss if I didn't ask about the appointment of one Neera Tanden, who's going to be Joe Biden's nominee to be run the Office of Management and Budget, aside from being an immensely consequential agency within the federal government that a lot of people don't particularly understand. You've had some personal experience with her. Just lay that out for our audience. I know you've recounted the story a couple of times.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get too personal with Neera, but I guess when you do have that behind-the-scenes interaction with someone, you understand a lot of how they operate. And I think the biggest thing with Neera is that she's essentially a political operator. I wouldn't think of her as super ideological, either left-wing or right-wing. She generally is looking out for her next position, and she's looking out for her kind of prestige within Democratic Party apparatus. So when she ran the Center for American Progress, which is a big think tank, Democratic-leaning think tank, something she was notorious for was, crafting policy products and communications to be friendly towards Democratic power centers, to be friendly towards various corporate donors who sometimes had a say over the things that she did. For instance, like I wrote something critical of Michael Bloomberg. She was upset about that because she was pitching him for money. Like that kind of thing happens constantly with her. And I don't think it's an ideological issue with her. It's more of just like she has a very career focused, prestige focused mindset within how she operates in politics. And I think that rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. Her predecessor at Center for American Progress was John Podesta, who, of course, is infamous now because the emails were hacked. Right. Podesta was also very ideologically neoliberal, but I think generally he got along better with people because he was very diplomatic. He respected different opinions. He was a little bit more principled. Whereas Neera, I think, is just more of a career machine operator. And I think, bringing someone like that into government who's constantly in feuds publicly and privately with their own staff, with other people, that was her reputation at Center for American Progress. I think that might be her reputation within government. I think when the Senate's confirming her, that's something they need to consider. Of course, don't take my word for it. Talk to a lot of people who work with her and have worked around her. But that is kind of the consensus, I think, if you end up talking to those people. So
yeah, I think it's very important in order to understand. All right, Zaid. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Coming up was the killing of Iran's top nuclear scientist in an attempt to block Joe Biden from resuming diplomacy with Tehran. My next guest, Trita Parsi, is going to weigh in when Rising continues.